we come to our final session with our kind guests. And our topic for this session is this. The final question addresses one of the three fundamental pillars of Buddhism, the Sangha, perhaps the most neglected aspect in Western countries. Is it possible to envision a cohesive Buddhist community in Europe? Can we identify a shared core of perspectives, values, and practices that are flexible enough to accommodate the variety of Buddhist traditions in Europe? Reflecting on the possibility of a European Sangha also prompts consideration of the meaning of monastic life today and the role of community in the lives of practitioners, whether monastic or lay, or neither in the case of my tradition.
Okay, thank you. I don't know how it happened, but it happened that we already started talking about this before the lunch break. And the title of the text that I prepared, or that I wanted to share with you, was Rethinking the European Sangha Beyond the Ethnic Divide. So a lot of the points I wanted to make, we already discussed. And I will just start with the first paragraph of what I wanted to say, which is, as we reflect on the possibility of a European Sangha, I would like to challenge us to consider who is actually seen, heard, and centered in this vision. Too often, conversations about Buddhism in Europe orbit around converted practitioners, typically ethnic Europeans, who have adopted Buddhism later in life. But what about the Buddhist ethnic minorities who have been living in Europe for generations? What about the children of Chinese, Vietnamese, Thai, and Tibetan immigrants who are born into Buddhist families and who have grown up in European cities and yet often remained on the margins of mainstream convert Buddhist spaces? Because the question isn't just, is a European Sangha possible? It's who's Europe and who's Sangha? And if we want to answer that, all of us, then we need to consider who is at the table and who is not at the table, and how do we frame this sense of belonging. So this is where I wanted to take the conversation, but it is also where it organically went into. And when we started talking about this topic before, what I didn't agree so much with is this justification. Like I heard a lot of justifications or explanations of why people from ethnic minorities that are traditionally Buddhist are often not seen in Buddhist organizations. And I have a bit of a problem with saying they, as if it's a homogeneous group. They don't feel comfortable being here because they're different. Because it's exactly this sort of othering that Roma communities face, right? This idea of like they are culturally so different, they don't want to participate, but this is not true. And I think it's a bit problematic to state something like this. And we have to be really careful not to reproduce these hegemonial power structures, blaming the minorities for not participating, based on assumptions that language is a barrier or intellectual vocabulary is a barrier, or that they are culturally just too different. And I do think that it is a blind spot. And if we want to create a pluralistic and cohesive Buddhist community, we need to be careful of this hierarchy that often places the ethnic European Buddhists at the center and treats Asian Buddhist communities, even those who have been rooted in Europe for a long time, as somehow peripheral or less European. And I think rather than assuming reasons for why there is this divide, what we can do if we want to establish a European Sangha is to ask ourselves, how do we make these spaces as inclusive as possible, inclusive to people of all genders, all class, all races, all nationalities, all traditions. And what was very interesting to me is that I was sitting outside now, trying to hide and take some more notes. And a lady came to me. Her name is Helena Chang. Unfortunately, she left, but she gave me the consent and blessing to mention this conversation. She's from Blia. And what she said is, Buddhism in Europe is like TCM, traditional Chinese medicine. In Europe, she's based in Austria, I think. So she said that traditional Chinese medicine is regarded as acupuncture, mainly, and not much more. And for her, in her view, with Buddhism, it's a bit the same. And I thought it's very interesting to hear something like this coming from someone who comes from an ethnic background that is traditionally Buddhist. And for me, this is, I think it makes me a little bit sad that she's not here with us explaining this to us. What, is it too close or too? Okay. It's a bit sad that she's not here with us to voice that opinion and explain further in which way Buddhism is reduced to just one practice or whatever she acquaints to acupuncture, because it shows us how much we can learn by including or really being proactive and making an effort in including these voices into our European Sangha. And as when Johnny raised the question about what happened in the last 50 years, and we came to the realization that 50 years is not a lot, we had a conversation afterwards and we said, that's true, we are still at the beginning of this whole thing, and that means we can still shape it. So at least within my Buddhist youth group, this is on my radar, and I do take a big responsibility in this, in making these spaces inclusive and really thinking about what does that mean and what do I have to do to open up these spaces, yes.
So basically we have like two different terms and notions. So Sangha stands for the ordained monastic community, and then the Buddhist assembly, which includes both like ordained monastics and lay practitioners, is called Parisa or Parishad in Sanskrit. So actually it's quite interesting because this usage of the term Sangha to denote the Buddhist community at large is a modernist kind of Western specific thing that's happened. And you would not hear anywhere within traditional Buddhist societies Sangha used with reference to the lay community at large or to the Buddhist community at large. So this is just, just to be a bit annoying in terms of, but I'm not saying this, as a kind of propounder of the superiority of monastic Buddhism at all. It's just like that perhaps the terminology is Parisa or Parishad rather than Sangha. So Sangha basically means a group of people. So by extension, this has become the Buddhist community at large. And I think somehow there is also an interesting shift in the semantic field of this term and notion, so that I think that in general as Western Buddhists, we do have some latent lurking authority issues. So it's not so nice to acknowledge the Sangha as a refuge, being the monastic Sangha as a superior set of humans who are the historical object of refuge. And we are more comfortable with these redefined terminologies such as, oh yeah, Sangha is the community of practitioners, or Sangha is, is all those who are engaged on this path of practice in the past, present, and future, etc. Because there obviously is an issue with the idea that the object of refuge is the monastic Sangha. And then we have, on the other hand, the object of recollection, the recollection of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, which is the Sangha of the noble ones. And this is true across the early Buddhist, Theravada, and Mahayana traditions. So the noble Sangha is the Sangha of those who have reached at least one of the stages of awakening, whichever map of the path to awakening you have. So it's kind of interesting how we are not comfortable with this idea of going for refuge into the monastic Sangha, and we need to embrace this redefined modernist notion of the Sangha as a Buddhist community. Anyway, that being said, I think there is something interesting as far as the ordained Sangha is concerned, that within traditional Buddhist communities, there is this idea that you have a right to exist just because you are committed to this path, and you are outside the production system, the society as such, but you are connected, but you have stepped out. So you are not isolated, but you can be more or less solitary, but somehow you are clearly positioned outside the walls of the productive society. And I mean, as a Buddhist monastic now back in the West, I face more and more this expectation that you have to gain the right to exist as a monastic. And so you have no right to exist just because you're practicing, but to the extent that you are a teacher or you're contributing explicitly to the society. So it's quite interesting, this shift that's happened. So I don't know in terms of a place for the ordained monastic Sangha, how this is going to unfold in terms of resources. I mean, we have to eat and, and have access to healthcare and all of that. So this is actually like the basic necessities of existence, and they are not really taken for granted if you are outside, the context. So yeah, I really don't know what's going to happen with this financial, economic constraints. And I mean, typically whenever there has been like a reduction in the surplus in world economies, the weakest segments of societies have suffered first. So being a parasite to the productive society, probably the monastic Sangha and the female monastic Sangha will be the first to go, and then, followed by other parasites who are not making their living and who depend on the generosity of the lay community. So this is all open to question. We will see how it goes. But wider discussion, wider discourse, so Sangha as community, it seems that really it's the weakest kind of segment within the European or Western in general Buddhist communities. And I think it does have to do with this theme that's emerged this morning already. So this individualistic project of self-perfection and self-improvement. And it's really interesting because, I mean, I often see like friends or practicing friends who may get sick or may have financial problems, and everybody's pitying them, but nobody's really doing anything about them. I mean, like, community doesn't come together. And if you are within traditional Buddhist societies, if like a member is unwell or has temporarily economic problems, or is in any kind of troubles, it's totally an organic process. So everybody's kind of coming together because you feel you belong. So there is this sense that at the end of the day, we are, connected, interconnected, but on the ground, I do seem to see far less willingness to really be there for others, in terms of like daily life things. I mean, you need to be, driven from A to B, and who's really going to be willing to help you out, or you're ill and you have no family members who is really there for you out of your practice community. Yeah, it's a big question. So I think it really points to this individualistic based sort of project and trajectory, which is part of the way Buddhism has been received in the West historically. So it's no wonder it's the way it is, because it's part of the way it's happened. And yeah, I think this is what I wanted to say.
Well, maybe I'll follow up Damadina's comment about the different sanghas and just say there was never an Asian sangha. So the idea of a European sangha is definitely a very, very new thing in the Buddhist world. So you can make the claim, even more controversial, that before 1893 in the Parliament of World Religions that was held in Chicago, most Buddhists around the Buddhist world would not have considered themselves Buddhist. They were members of a particular practicing community with a lineage of teachers and a lineage of texts and a lineage of practices that they engaged in, but there wasn't this overarching sense of, oh, we're all Asian Buddhists together. And that is something that's quite modern. So I think we want to, in the background, keep that in mind. But one of the ideals that you see of Buddhist practice in the Sutta Nipata, for example, is there's the rhinoceros. The translation's a little problematic, rhinoceros horn sutta. But it's going forth like a rhinoceros, a single horn rhinoceros in the wild, or like a bull elephant who's escaped from the herd, or like a king who's renounced the kingdom and going off and practicing on your own. And there is that tradition that's celebrated. But within the same text, there's a recognition that, yes, going along with an enlightened, spiritually adept friend is actually a really good thing as well. And there's other early Buddhist texts that say more than it's a good thing to go along with a good friend on the path, but that's actually crucial. It's essential to have friends on the path. And I think we want to keep that in mind, whether the friends are ordained or the friends are not ordained, they're lay people. We need companions on this path. And I think that we have, I was mentioning earlier, some neuroscience give you a little bit more neuroscientific evidence about the ways in which we know what meditation practice is doing, the same way in which we know things about psychedelics and how those affect consciousness. One of the things that meditation does is it destabilizes the default mode network, which is a set of neural connections that we all have that's associated with maintaining a narrative sense of self. Part of what's going on with meditation is destabilizing that network. And that's interesting because what it means is then destabilizing that allows us to be present otherwise. Destabilizing our traditional understanding, personal, individual understanding of ourselves narratively, we're freed from that identity and open to engaging the world differently. And I mentioned earlier this notion of our brains not being individual intracranial things, they're social. Our brains are social. We resonate with one another at that very basic neural level. When you're practicing with other people, that's an addition to the practice. You can practice on your own, and that's really good if you want disengagement from the householder's life and the patterns of life to go along with being immersed in that world. Going into a monastic setting and practice has the double advantage of out of that day-to-day life, but also practicing along with others. So I think that we have good neuroscientific evidence for why individual practice, solo meditation, solo retreats, as well as group practices put together are very efficacious because it allows us to be present otherwise. Whether that constitutes developing something like a European Sangha, I wonder, because this notion of a Sangha that has a national or continental identity seems to get so generic that I wonder what it would mean to have that support for one another's practice. But then I step back and I put on my modernist robes and I think, but we do have a need for getting together in ways like a gathering like this, where people from all these different traditions, Theravada traditions, Mahayana, Vajrayana traditions, secular Buddhist traditions, getting together to see what is our shared commitments, what are our shared values here, and how are we going to go about best embodying those, and doing those in a contemporary context, where the responsibility traditionally of the Sangha was not just to receive the material support from the lay community. The Sangha had a responsibility to that community as well. It's interdependence between the ordained part of the Sangha and the lay community. So what would our relationship to the wider society be as members of a practicing community? How do we embody the best of our values about living the bodhisattva life, which I think simply stated is, how do we develop the virtuosity to respond to the situations we find ourselves in politically, economically, socially, culturally, in ways that will allow us to contribute to realizing more liberating patterns of relationships? How do we go about doing that? I don't think any of us can do it alone. That's why I quoted these statements from the Zen teachers in Japan. Practicing on your own, at some point, is just about self. Practicing that you're doing together with others, that's where we will find, if we find it at all, or are somehow able to express or embody our Buddha nature, it's going to come from practicing with others. So I think that the aspiration is having a practicing community in Europe that supports people across traditions, where the differences within each of these Buddhist traditions is valued as something that contributes to the diversity of Buddhist ways of being present, that gives us greater resilience as Buddhists in the world of challenges that we're facing.
Again, I resonate with what everyone's been saying. I would actually go a step further and aspire not so much for a European Sangha, using the word Sangha in its broadest sense, but a planetary Sangha. That sounds rather absurdly optimistic. But I think the world we live in, has been mentioned many times, is one in which issues like climate change and all the other issues that seem to engage us now are not solvable by any particular nation or continent or state. And I feel that if Buddhism as an ethical tradition is to be able to rise to the challenges of meeting these, what I think are essentially ethical issues. How do we relate to the environment, to the planet, to the globalization, capitalism, etc.? We need to find an ethic that can respond to those phenomena at a planetary rather than a national or even European scale. What that would actually mean in practice, I don't have a clue. But on one, no, maybe that's not quite true. You see, if I ask myself, what is my Sangha? In other words, what constitutes the community that I feel most identified with as a Buddhist? I don't belong to any Buddhist tradition, organization. I've trained in different schools. I've had different teachers. I've developed my own approaches to some of these ideas. I don't have a home in the sense of a group I'd go to once a week or once a month, like a church or a Sangha in that sense at all. But that does not mean I feel I'm living a totally isolated, cut off, rhinoceros-type existence. In fact, because of our means of media and so on, I have a very rich Sangha life through Zoom conversations I hold regularly with friends all over the world. And I feel that it's Sangha, the beating heart of Sangha lies in the quality of the relationships we form with others. It's not about joining a club. And I think sometimes people show up at a Buddhist center because they're basically looking for some kind of group of people who think more or less along the same lines, provide certain rituals, help, pastoral care, that they can somehow call upon. And I think that's important. That's certainly part of it. But I feel that Sangha extends both from a handful of people who have deep shared commitments to common values and who connect with each other, who support each other, as well as a sense of belonging to a culture we might call a culture of awakening, that is planetary now. And one of the most striking confirmations of this took place for me a couple of years ago when I was invited to Japan. It's the first time I've been invited by a traditional Asian Buddhist community. It was the Jodo Shin school. And I don't think there are any Jodo Shin Buddhists here, are there? No, there we go, another absence. And I'd never been particularly interested in Jodo Shin Buddhism, to be honest. I had studied it a bit. But spending a month hosted by and in the company of Japanese Jodo Shin Buddhists completely turned me around. And I found there, particularly in the figure of Shinran Shonin, a figure who really strikes me as someone who embodies a practice that is very much rooted in the world. I don't want to go into the background of Shinran, you can look that up. But the Jodo Shin school is effectively a lay movement. They have now a priesthood, but Shinran himself didn't want to have priests at all. He was more radical than Luther. He basically said there's no difference between men, women, young, old, all of those binaries we live in. And for him, the core of the Dharma lay in what he calls basically faith, which I think is very similar to the Pali word pasada, a kind of lucid confidence, we might say, a turning about of the heart from self-centered, egocentric concerns to a way of life that opens the heart and the mind to the existence of other beings, humans and others, and serves as a constant sort of grounding of one's sense of your own purposes in life and also being part of a wider community of those who likewise are committed to such values. And this, I think, brings us very much to the idea that you mentioned, Dharmadina, the idea of the Arya Sangha, the noble community, those who have entered the stream of the Eightfold Path. And there I think you find a concept of Sangha that goes, that is no longer based on the binary split between the ordained and the non-ordained, but centers the idea of Sangha in an existential turn of mind, of life, towards the values of the Dhamma, primarily the Dhamma, let's say. And you live and try to live your life from that perspective. Another point I would want to emphasize in the idea of Sangha is that Sangha is a practice. Sangha is something you do. It's not something you belong to or feel part of or get a sense of identity from. Sangha is about not only forming relationships and friendships, but cultivating and developing those relationships and friendships. I think it's an extraordinarily crucial ground on which our practice is based. It's not just about me. It's about my relationship with those who I know in my Buddhist circles, perhaps, but also it's about forming the same quality of relationships with people who may have not the slightest interest in Buddhism. I think the practice of Sangha also extends beyond the limits of the Buddhist world that we might inhabit. And it's very easy to take Sangha for granted, that you kind of forget that it's something you have to work at pretty much continues. The same with a marriage, for example. You can't, it's, my wife, etc., one just thinks of as part of the furniture sometimes. But of course, it's more than that. It's an ongoing practice to keep the relationship alive and go through crises and difficulties and turmoil together and come out the other side. And in that sense, I feel that the Sangha is enriched by diversity, and I very much take the point, I think it was you, Peter, who recognized that the European Sangha, or a planetary Sangha, is effectively being willing to embrace extraordinary diversity, and not just in different forms of Buddhist philosophy or belief, but people from different parts of the world, in different social and economic groups to one's own, to people who are minorities, who are marginalized. I think all of this really constitutes the potential of what a Sangha could be. And I feel that the Dharma can serve as a kind of a linking element. It's threads that can pull together people from more and more diverse backgrounds, and that the role of each individual in a Sangha is to support each other in their flourishing as practitioners of the Dharma, just as their presence in your life supports your flourishing. It's a mutual interdependence of allowing the other to become who they could potentially be, without criticism, without judgment. Again, it's a big ask, but I feel that in the world we live today, these are precisely the kinds of values that we are most in need of. Thank you.
And I understand why it's difficult to be the last one. Yeah, I agree with many things you all said. I would just like to highlight maybe one more aspect of how I interpret or how I understand the term Sangha. Fully understanding that the meaning I have is related to this wider global version, not the monastic one, and I don't want to claim that when I speak about Sangha, I attend that. My basic feeling when I consider this term, and I think about this term, and it has been staying with me for 3 decades now when I first encountered Buddhism, is how strange this whole thing is. the strangeness of everything related to Buddhism. The strangeness of the teacher that we cannot really figure out the exact teachings. What you mentioned that earlier, but we don't even know what the original teachings or words of the Buddha were. Of course, we have a sense, we have a guess, but whether we can be sure about it, that's an open question. So that's a vague space or place to be. But then the teachings are so diverse and so different and so complex. If you relate to different traditions, different lineages, you can argue forever who is right, who is wrong. But you still feel some commonality, you still feel some connectedness, but you are not sure what that is, and that's very strange. And I think that the term Sangha is also strange because it's not a sect. It's not even a religion. It's a way of being, but you can find multiple rituals and different styles if you go to different Buddhist countries. And so you can't really say, or you can't really see the exact commonality. So we don't see the exact teaching, we don't see the exact community, we don't see the exact teacher, but there's still something there that exists and that we are related to, that we connect to. And for me, that was liberating when I realized that this vagueness is not a challenge. It might be, but it's an asset. That it's a value. That it's something very positive. That it's not defined. That it's not set in stone. That it's not clear cut. That it's just strange. and that's what I feel when I meet any Buddhists anywhere in the world. Whether they are lay or monastics or white Europeans or traditional Asian Buddhist followers, that you feel something connecting you. You feel something deeper than just your humanity, but that's not identifiable as religious or as practical or, practice-based. It cannot be identified. It cannot be confined. And that I like too. I really like that. And the closest association I feel and I have with this term when I think about it is the home, the word home. What you feel when you are at home, what you feel when you think about your home, when you think about your family. There are a lot of differences, a lot of diversity, a lot of challenges, even quarrels, debates, disagreements, but you still feel you connect. You still feel you are part of something bigger. That is, of course, more identifiable in the case of a home or in the case of a family, but still transcends classical boundaries and classical set structures. And that I really like in that term as well, the term home. So if I consider Sangha in that sense, in this weird, strange, unidentifiable, unlocatable sense, then the question whether a European Sangha is possible, on the one hand, yes, why not? It is possible. Even more, it exists. It exists. It's here. Whoever is here today is the European Sangha, and there may be other gatherings in Europe right now happening at the same time. 2 people, 3 people, 10 people. They are the European Sangha as well, but they are the global Sangha as well. So wherever people share this type of vague, strange commonality, they are part of the Sangha, for me. So in that sense, European Sangha is possible. It must be inclusive. It must include everyone who feels at home when he or she meets or they meet someone else. And I just like the character of it. I just like the friendliness of it. I just like the warmth, the warm-heartedness of this feeling, without feeling that I'm part of a sect. So in that sense, yes, it's possible. Yes, it exists, and yes, it will change and grow, and it will have its own life. And I think that's the most beautiful thing that the Buddha initiated magically or miraculously. And that's the most beautiful thing that the Buddha entrusted his teachings to, that there was no heir to the Buddha, another Buddha following him. But we all are part of something that has no boundaries and that has no identity and that has no definability. And I really like that.
First of all, this rhinoceros horn, or however it's to be interpreted, option, is always presented as second best. So it's like, if you cannot find good companions, then just go off and wander alone on your own. So this is not even presented as the ideal path. But that being said, I think, and connecting to what Gabor so sweetly put it, I think that there is a sense of need for connection that is emerging. And when you are part of a healthy Buddhist community, you can have solitude and seclusion, but you are not isolated, so you're still connected. And there is this implicit sense of connection. I mean, I have been on long retreats at the so-called margins of Asian Buddhist communities, but I was never isolated. I was maybe in solitude, and there was space for solitude, but you do belong to the society, so you're not really out of it. And I think this setup of even setting aside lay or monastic divides really speaks to this sense of belonging, as a matter of fact. And I think one of the challenges really has to do with the sense of isolation and disconnect that there is in contemporary practice communities or non-existent communities. So I think that this is really what is speaking to me, what Gabor has been saying, this sense of recognition and mutual sense of being there together. It's probably because it's kind of so lacking normally, and you are more like on your own. And I also feel that a lot of this ritualized belonging to Buddhist groups or subgroups or sectarian ritualized coming together, sharing the body language, like certain way of being and speaking softly, etc. I mean, all of this, this sense of sharing behaviors also speaks to this absence of a kind of shared frame of reference. So it's a different way of responding to the same need in a way. So maybe we could explore, how to make more explicit these needs for connection in ways which are not superficial, so are not just satisfied by these, lifestyle statements. If I drink herbal tea, sorry, I drink coffee, I mean, I'm still drinking, I don't drink herbal teas, and I don't have that body language, and I don't feel compelled to embrace that nunnish body language that's expected of me. So maybe we can connect, in real ways, and we could look into that more. So no need to be rhinoceros horns, and maybe we have like first option of being together happily.
The discussion we've had so far seems to me a little bit about what a European Sangha would be, what it would consist in, sort of like what would the identity be. And I'd ask us all to reflect on what would it do. Let's say there was such a thing as a European Sangha. Just imagine whichever definition of Sangha we're comfortable with. And what would its purpose be? And one way that I would frame it is to say that the challenges that we're facing, that were being mentioned earlier, these existential risks, climate change, etc., that are of concern for us because they're about humanity and the survival of the ecosphere. These are not problems. Climate change, take that one for an example. Climate change is not a problem. We know technically exactly what to do to stop climate change from getting any worse. Stop emitting carbon into the atmosphere completely, zero. Why are we not doing that? It's value judgments. What's more important, the environment or the economy? Is it more important to continue in the United States of having the culture of the automobile? That's part of American culture. Shouldn't we hold on to that? It's about social values. These are not problems that can be solved because with something like climate change, we can't even say what would count as a solution at this point. I would refer to these as predicaments. They're values conflicts. We human beings have lots of value conflicts. So the question for me would be, can a Sangha perform the function of helping us to get better resolution for these predicaments that we face? Where resolution in English means two things. The degree of detail you have in something. So let's say you take a photo with your iPhone and it's got so many pixels, but you've got the latest iPhone 16, and you get 10 times the resolution, so you could blow up your photo to the size of a theater screen and look at every little detail that's on there. So resolution and that sense of clarity about how things got to be the way they are. And the second one would be resolution, the sense of a firm commitment. What are the values we're really committed to collectively, together in that shared sense? So I wonder whether when we think about Sangha, we don't want to just talk about a sense of connection, which is very important. That's the basis. But then what do we do once we establish that sense of being at home together? How do we come to some resolution to these predicaments that we're facing? And can Sangha really play a role in that? And I think it can. I think that's the great promise.
I think I'm also still hung up on you trying to describe this very special sense of belonging that we didn't find a word in the end for it. And I would like to share how I experienced this in our local Buddhist youth Sangha, this feeling of how it manifests in our group, this feeling of belonging. And the way I see it is that it's special in a way that we have a very broad spectrum of how much we practice. Like we have very, very devotional practitioners who are devoted to a Rinpoche outside of the youth group, all the way to practitioners or participants who come just every Wednesday for 2 hours to practice with us. And this particular person I'm thinking of, he said yesterday that when he comes on Wednesday, he always feels so good on Thursday and Friday, and he sleeps so much better. And then this feeling kind of, goes down, and then he's just looking forward to Wednesday again. But other than that, he has no Buddhist connections or practice. So is this a very special, and as you said, what was the word you said, strange? It's a strange phenomenon happening there. And something that is also very special is that since we come from different corners of life and we are different ages, we do disagree sometimes. And we do, after we have our practice, we sit in the kitchen and we drink herbal tea. and we do disagree on certain topics, but we never leave the temple not smiling. And we never leave the temple without giving each other hugs, even though we disagreed 5 minutes ago. And it's not that we practice how to do, nonviolent dialogue, but it's something that somehow emerges automatically just because we have this practice together. Then we can disagree with each other and still laugh about it in a way. It becomes less serious. And one word that I relate to when we talk to Sangha or in a sense of community is that we are creating safe spaces. And I think, especially in the Buddhist youth, we behave in ways that are very uncommon outside the Sangha. For example, we open up our practice just by, bowing and then taking up the space and just sharing what is going on right now in our lives. And the special thing about it is that we don't respond to it. We don't give any advice. We don't give our opinions. And just this space of, just this attentiveness and mindfulness, this is already, we cannot underestimate how much this is giving to a person in this time of isolation. And I think it's good to have spaces like these that are different in a way that it's not about competition and it's not about, jealousy and all of these things. Like, you don't have to fight for your space in a Sangha, which as a young person, you often feel like you need to, prove yourself and take a position in this world. But the Sangha is kind of, you can come as you are and You're welcomed.
So it is time for some questions from the floor.
I have the impression this person wants to say something about Sangha.
Well, it's true, actually. Yes. Yes, I've lived the last 30 years in one particular Sangha, which isn't monastic or lay, like Gunaketu there. We're both from Triratna. And I had a thought earlier that when we were talking about social media, and young people particularly, although I can tell you that there are plenty of old people who are addicted to social media. What I notice is that when we have young people's weekends, it's very difficult to get people to turn off their phones, because the relationship between us and our phones has become so almost essential. It's like part of my personality. But what I also notice is people say, but these are my friends. I can't lose contact with my friends. So it strikes me that what we need to do is replace phones and social media with real relationships, which comes to the topic of Sangha, and I think that in my own experience, the building of lifelong committed friendships with people who don't necessarily agree with each other, but have the same basic commonality of practice within a certain range of variability is absolutely life-changing and a tremendous support to practice. And that's my own experience. And when we meet together in this context, I've been coming to the EBU since 2013. We meet together as Buddhists, but we don't usually talk about how we practice Buddhism. And if we did, we would discover that we differed with each other very strongly in some situations, and then we would not find it so easy to work together, I think. So our success as a European Buddhist Union really depends on us trusting that we are all doing our best to practice the Dharma in our own different ways and not going there. But it's a lot about respect, I think, for our differences and being willing to just accept the differences without having to address them, I think.
I discovered today, thanks to a question of Michael, that I'm now gaining majority because I'm 18 years with the EBU. And when I came there, it was somehow, they discovered that I'm also working in the European institution. And then they asked me, oh, could you connect the EBU with the European institution? So I tried my best to do that. Now we have a good team working in Brussels. And in 2008, I introduced this participatory status to the Council of Europe. And when we came there, we were really the aliens. There's a friend, maybe some of you remember, Michel Aguilar. And when we came there, they asked us weird questions like, can we talk to you? You don't have a God? Or why do you speak German and French? I thought Buddhists speak only English. You know, we come really from scratch where they're now. So then we started little by little, and it takes time. They are quite normal, you know. They know not new age, strange, and whatever. And then little by little, we started to working with them in the different committees. And we have been working together 4 years in a report on human rights and religion. I said, gosh, we have the same problems. Yeah, Christians, Muslims, atheists, whatever, we have the same problems. We need us in each other in order to fight for the same things or to go for or aim for the same things. So little by little, this notion of Sangha you were describing, I was always thinking, well, actually you can have Sangha with people from completely different religions, and even those who don't have any religion, who are really secular, said, leave me alone with religion. They are really not my thing. And now, after all these years, now we are 2025, we all have worked very hard together for having this network for interreligious and interconvictional dialogue. And that is what I was feeling, something, an outcome of this. Yeah, I see brothers and sisters and others, Catholic or whatever, and we have beautiful people, Dominican monks, and we have people who are so deeply rooted in their tradition that it really touches me and it teaches me. And I allow others all the time to really teach me, and maybe I can also be of some help for others. And right now we are really aiming together to have this platform for dialogue in the Council of Europe, this large thing. And that really unites us. I can say that, and we have good friends like Tia is helping me. We are now organizing these webinars on different subjects, and we always try for the same things. And I think we really, I would just really encourage to enlarge your mind to think Sangha as broad as possible, because right now our human race needs broad minds.
Thank you, Gabriella. Yeah. Question over there.
Thank you. I want to pick up what you, Peter, asked about. What do we do and how can we support each other to foster good, enlightening relationships? And I really much appreciate the chaplaincy work that is going on, that we are pooling the best resources to do that. So in Norway, we have a challenge, with diverse Sangha, some very good teachers, and some of the Sanghas are not so good or well-resourced in teaching. So how can we support each other across Sanghas to cultivate the best pedagogy and the best language and teaching resources to support each other?
I think, can you hear me? Yeah. I mean, I think if you are to teach, you have to practice first. So I think supporting, people in their practice before having to turn or set yourself up as a teacher, or, it might not even be ego-driven, but sometimes, conditions force you to teach. So I think that nourishing, practice opportunities and retreat opportunities and all of that might be the key in allowing responsible and qualified, teachers to appear, in these communities.
My suggestion would also be networks. As an example, we have here also today the Dharma Gyan Youth, which is a youth group from Upper Austria. And in their center in Gomde, there are currently 2 Tibetan nuns visiting and doing practices. So because we are very well connected, we organized them, since they're here for a month, to also visit us in Vienna. So I think having this network and broadening this network, we can use the opportunities of having guests from abroad and benefit from them. And also another case that just came to mind, since we are talking also about technology, is that I had a case in the Buddhist youth where someone could just not wrap their head around the concept of no self. And I reached my capacity of how I can explain it. And what I did is I went online and I looked for teachers who are really nowadays you have many Buddhist teachers, monks with YouTube channels, with TikTok channels. And I reached out to one of them who could explain it really well. And I was like, will you be willing to visit the Austrian Buddhist youth via Zoom? And we had a really, really nice exchange with him. So that's also one way to approach it.
I think this is a very important question because there are so much learning and so much resources in different contexts in Europe, in different Buddhist organizations and Buddhist groups. There are so much variety there that personally I think we would need to learn more about each other's activities and work and know who is doing what. But we need moments and occasions like this to be able to share. So definitely going forward with the connection building, going forward with the information sharing, going forward with the mutual agreements. There are various organizations here already who have formed the agreements and cooperate on specific projects. It's a wonderful example that the Italian Buddhist Union is supporting the European Buddhist Union with this event, but there are other organizations also who cooperate, not in the context of EBU, but outside the context. I think the only response to that challenge is to learn more about what we do individually. And when you do something that others don't do, we go to your place. When others do something that you do, you go to that place, and just simply create more organic threads between us, kind of a tapestry of information sharing and connection and joint projects. I believe in joint projects myself. And actually, it's a real privilege to work together with EBU on the chaplaincy program through Dharma Gate College, but also through Mind and Life Europe. It's a privilege to work together with the Italian Buddhist Union Research Center. So we have a lot of potential. We haven't really explored the full potential of this very group being present here through these mutual links and joint projects that we could develop. So I think there's a massive potential there, and there's no limit to that, only time and energy.
Two quite big things. We said we would close at 4, so I just want to finish by thanking our panel very, very much for your time. It's been really great to have the day with you.